Hi, my name is Dave Bodie for Tuts Plus, and thanks so much for checking out this video. This video is the first video in a series of videos that will be exploring the process of creating an EP. I'm working with a group of musicians who will be traveling on the road and playing, and before they leave, they want to produce a short EP so that they can have something to sell when they're on the road. The content will be Christian rock / pop / folk music, with the instrumentation being mostly acoustic guitar, electric guitar, and piano driven, and then the other standard instruments, drums, keys, vocals, etc., used to fill things out as necessary. This series will cover the production and recording of this project using pretty modest equipment. I'll be using a pretty simple FireWire interface and just a few microphones, a large diaphragm studio condenser microphone, and maybe a small diaphragm pencil condenser microphone. And that's just about it. We'll be using the microphones to record pretty standard stuff like vocals and acoustic guitars, and then the rest of the instrumentation will be handled by virtual instruments or recording direct like electric guitars and bass guitars. We're going to start at the beginning and talk about some different ideas that you can use to record some better scratch tracks, and then we're going to cover a variety of things like tracking acoustic guitars, electric guitars, bass guitars, programming drums with a drummer, and then using a bunch of different virtual instruments as well. And we'll talk about recording vocals and some different ideas that you can use to help coach your singers to get a better performance. After the tracking is done, we'll move on to mixing and mastering and show you how the whole thing comes together. So with any project like this, you want to consider the whole scope of the project, because that's going to help you determine how much time and effort you're going to put into it, and it's going to help you and the people you're working with be able to adjust their expectations on what the final product is going to sound like. So you want to consider things like budget, time, location, gear, and talent. The first two, budget and time, are probably the most important. The first two, budget and time, are really big ones and important ones to consider. We can't spend forever working on these projects, even though they may be fun, because we all have lives to get to. We all have bills to pay, family and friends, and general life stuff to deal with. So we really have to take a budget and our time investment into consideration with projects like these, because it's very easy for them to get out of control in the time realm. A good friend of mine once told me that recording projects are never really finished, they're abandoned. And throughout my experience recording and producing music, I would say that this is pretty accurate. There's always something that you can do to make something quote unquote better. You can record a better vocal, nail that guitar part and get that part just right. Maybe fix something here, fix something there, get a better string sound, get some new, better plugins or a better reverb, whatever the case may be. There's always, little things that you can tweak essentially forever. But at the end of the day, you just have to say, that's it. This is the way the song is going to be, love it or hate it, because I can't put any more time into it. Time is like our number one valuable resource, because in the scope of your entire life, you don't want to say that you put too much time into this thing that brought you very little, in return as far as monetary value. Now, if it's something that you're doing as a love passion, knock yourself out and spend forever getting it just right. But those are good things to consider when you're producing something like this, because if you don't kind of keep them in check, things can get out of hand really quickly. You can say yes to too many things. Yes, let's redo the vocals here. Yes, let's recut those guitars here. But at the end of the day, it's really good to keep those things in check so that you can regain your life back and you're not slave to some project that, has to be perfect, because no project will be perfect. The other things, location, gear, and talent, are important to consider in the scope of things as well. If you have a huge budget, you can go to a really nice studio with some top-shelf microphones and some high-end preamps, and things will be sounding probably better than you recording in your garage with a couple of SM58s. In this case, the budget is kind of linked to the location and the gear, but also has to do with availability and schedules as well, which is one of those time elements. The last thing, talent, is a good thing to consider as well. Are you using musicians that do music as their full-time gig, not on the side, but this is what they get paid to do? They're doing it 5 nights a week and on weekends. Or are you using amateurs that do music and they sing for fun? That will really affect a couple of things. It'll affect how fast you can get stuff down. A pro musician or a singer is going to come in and they're going to get it right away. You're going to spend less time tracking, and you can focus more on the mixing and mastering and the other production type stuff. And the amateur guys are going to need to come in and they're going to need to, play it several times and, They're going to need to get comfortable. They're going to need to punch in spots here and there. And the end result may not be perfect no matter how many times that you do it. So this is going to adjust kind of things in your time perspective as well as the quality perspective in what the final product is going to be, both for you and the people that you're working with. It's important to put those things into perspective for yourself, but also to help kind of coach people who are hiring you to do this project and help guide them into what are appropriate expectations for the end result of a project like this. You know, a lot of people think that when you record stuff, it goes into a magic box and then it comes out sounding like angels and, radio-ready tracks and stuff that's going to reach the top of iTunes. But producing something that's really good and making something that you're really proud of takes work. I think anyone that has even a little bit of life experience knows this. You can't get something for nothing, and Rome wasn't built in a day. It's going to take an investment in time. But when you consider the kind of scope of the project, budget, time, location, gear, and talent, it can really help put things into perspective so that when you reach the final product and you're listening to your finished project, you can be happy with what you got because you know that we only set aside this much time, we worked really hard in that much time, and this is what we got. You have to decide up front how much time you're going to put into it so that when you get into the end, you don't have regrets. You didn't say, oh man, I wish I would have went to my son's second birthday party instead of working on this ridiculous project for this people because I said yes to too many things. So always important to keep things in mind when you're working on recording projects because again, they can get out of hand really, really quickly. So with all that out of the way, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to jump inside of Reaper and we're going to take a look at where we are in a few of these songs. Now, I think we're doing 6 songs for this project, and we're not going to look at all of them today, but what we will do is we'll look at several of the scratch tracks and we'll talk about some things that you can do to help keep your musicians really on top of it when they're recording those scratch tracks, and that can help to make everything else that comes after those scratch tracks really fall in line much better, which will save you time and headaches down the road. We'll also talk about recording some acoustic guitars that we did right after we recorded some of the scratch tracks for a few of these tracks. So let's get right to it. Let's jump into Reaper and check it out. Now, the first thing that we're going to be looking at in this video is the scratch tracks that we created, right? So if we're recording these songs and you've never done this, the first thing that can be really helpful to do is to lay down a scratch track. Maybe this is acoustic guitar and voice, maybe it's piano and voice, whatever it is, it's basically kind of a guide track, if you will, so that we have some harmonic reference, some rhythmic reference, and the vocal line so that when we're tracking the other parts, the guitars, bass, drums, etc., we have something to reference to. So the scratch track is not something that we're going to use for anything really. It's just basically as a guide track. And so I'm going to walk you through and show you a couple of the scratch tracks that we recorded here. This first one here, this is just acoustic guitar and voice. And because we need this to be, rhythmically at least mostly accurate, whenever I track these scratch tracks with folks, this is my buddy Jeff who's playing here and singing. You'll hear him in a second. I like to put on the metronome. But for a project that has more of a slower tempo, so this is 94 beats per minute in 4/4 time, a quarter note metronome can be a little bit difficult to follow if you have a busier part, perhaps a strumming part that has more subdivisions in it. It's much easier to get lost with kind of a quarter note beat, especially in slower tempos. So what I like to do is throw in a drum track in there to help in the tracking process. And so I just threw an instance of Contact in here, put on a little jazz kit, which is brushes, and I put a compressor on it here with some auto makeup gain. And so what this will do here, this will give him some at least 8th note subdivisions, and a couple times in here I play some 16th note patterns. So it's a little bit of a groove to work with, and it's a lot easier to keep track of the beat than this. And I don't know what we're talking about, split the difference there, but I think I was adjusting the microphone. When I recorded these, I basically used one microphone for just about everything. It's an AKG C3000B. Nothing fancy, it costs, I think, $300 back in the day, but I've had it for a long time and it's worked out pretty well. Again, we don't need to be rolling out the RCA ribbon mics for a project like this with a relatively low budget and a quick time frame. To record this, basically I put the microphone about halfway between his mouth and the whole of the acoustic guitar, and that's how he recorded this. But the drums really help because this guitar part, ding, 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 that is a 16th note subdivision, right? You are my one in the two and the three and the four and the so it can really help to line things up a lot better with, you know, maybe some kind of percussion track in there. And you can see in this project, we do have a couple of other tracks recorded here. And so what I did, because when we recorded this, because we had time, after we recorded the scratch track, I had Jeff lay down some of the acoustic parts that he wanted. So we started with this finger picking part here. And so we laid that down, and then we did another track of acoustic guitars. This kind of more of a strummy thing happening. And, you know, without effects, these tracks came out really nice. You know, even though we recorded that in my office space, which again is not the best location, I don't detect any strange room reflections, any background noise. It's a clean track. We recorded this about 8 inches away from the sound hole. The microphone has pretty good sensitivity, so we got pretty good results. I mean, I'm perfectly happy with that for this track. And we did the same thing with this acoustic guitar, mic in the same position, just a different feel, using a pick. And that's pretty much it. When we were laying down the scratch track, you know, it just took a couple more times through to lay down these other tracks, and the song was well on its way. Let me fire up another track here. All right, so here's another song that we're going to be looking at. I got sent this scratch track by email, so check this out.
1, 2, 3, 4. Day after day, as I wake in your presence, you satisfy my heart. You are all I.
So basically what they did for me is they recorded this on an iPhone, I think, and they put the metronome pretty close, and Jeff was playing acoustic guitar, and this guy named Michael was recording the vocals, and they just sang to the phone. And this was good enough to give us a guide track. And again, while Jeff was here recording those other scratch tracks for the last song, which is called Be Near, I had him lay down guitar parts for this track as well. In the same way, we used that AKG C3000B. Another kind of finger pick arpeggio thing, which is pretty much the basis for this song. And then he was going to do a strum thing. So he did a strum track for me, which is this one right here. And I have these pumped up pretty good because we were tracking vocals for this, which we'll talk about in an upcoming video here. So they're compressed and you know, jacked way up just so that we could get them in the mix and keep it down quiet. But when we were doing the guitars, he played this one, and then about halfway through him playing this strum pattern here, I turned around and looked and I saw he wasn't using a pick, and I was like, you know, I really feel like this could use a pick to just brighten it up a little bit more. So I had him record another one with a pick, and I used both of these in kind of a hard right-left pan thing. This is without any effects here. And so that got us most of the way there. We're going to build out the instrumentation more than this a little bit. Not exactly sure how we're going to treat this song, but that gives you the general idea of where we're going here. And let me show you one more track really quick. And so this is the next track we're going to check out, we're not going to look at all of the scratch tracks for all of the cuts that we're going to be working on, but I just wanted to select a few and talk about them. So you can see that this one we've actually done a good amount on, but I just want to show you, where we started from. And this is the scratch track where we started. Now this one is pretty slow. We're at 65 BPM. I'll turn up the metronome here. And this was another one that I could tell right away, because of the real slow and just the general feel of the song, that it would be really easy for not only the scratch tracks, but the subsequent guitar tracks to get really out of control as far as the tempo. There'd be a good possibility for them to, drift in and out. So for this one, again, I laid down just a real simple drum groove here. Again, I used the brushes kit in Contact. Just to give a little bit more subdivision to it. And that really helped to lock in this scratch track here. I basically looped that a bunch of times so that he could get the scratch track down. And then while we were recording the scratch track, we just went right in and we recorded some acoustic guitars to this as well. And so I'll show you that really quick. What we have here, all the acoustics. We'll just check out these guys here. Again, this is another one that's finger picking. Not all of them are these kind of slow jam treatments. I remember that when we originally recorded this, I made a goof and I tracked one of the guitars with a microphone that I had plugged into my interface, which was 1.5 feet away from the guitar. And so the level was super low. So for about a week, I was working with these two guys right here. Which is not too bad. It was actually an Omni. It's a measurement mic actually, but it's extremely accurate and it's really pretty good for acoustic guitars. But because it was so far away, I had to jack up the normalization about 17 decibels to get it in the neighborhood of this other track here, which was recorded with the C3000B, right up in the guitar's grill. And I also used 2 different guitars because I like the tone of this Blue Ridge guitar that I own, and Jeff brought a Taylor. And the Taylor has more of kind of a high, zingy sound, and the Blue Ridge has much more of a kind of low, beefy bottom. So the combination of those I thought would sound really good, but I made a goof. I made an engineering error there, and I mixed up which microphones that I tracked. So when Jeff came back to record another scratch track for a song, I had him bring his guitar again, and we recorded this track right here. And so this is with a Martin guitar. Let me copy over these effects here so they sound somewhat similar. And so this is the Martin here. It sounds really cool in stereo. This track up here was actually fine, except that there were a couple of noises in it because it was so far away. There was a little chair squeak in there when he shifted his weight on the chair, and that got picked up. Other than that, it was actually fine to use even though it was jacked up this far. It was a tiny bit noisy, and so I could run some noise reduction on it, but really it was just easier to have him record it again. And we didn't need the entire thing. Basically, we just needed, 20 bars or so through the intro, the verse, and then the chorus, and that's pretty much all we needed in order to loop it, because we don't necessarily need a take of him doing this entire thing. I just needed enough to be able to loop a couple of times, and then, maybe one variation, so it wasn't, the same 4 bars looped over and over. But, if you gave me 12 bars of the same pattern, then I could loop that a couple of times and mix it up, and you basically can't tell that it's looped, essentially, unless there's some kind of weird, mistakes in there. But overall, this came out pretty nice here. And then we also did some strum stuff as well. And so that's what these tracks are down here. And I'm always cautious, when you do this doubling acoustic guitar thing, if you're panning it hard left and hard right, how's that going to sound if it goes into mono? So it's always good to check that. And right over here, I have a mono button here on the main bus. That's not quite as good as this. And we might be able to adjust the panning to get it a little bit better. But the thing that really made that work a little bit better was using 2 different guitars. Even though they were the same notes, and because they had a different tone, a different character, we're going to get less kind of phase cancellation in there, because, this guitar sounds different than this guitar. So, it obviously would have been cool to do some kind of mid-side mic technique, but I didn't have a figure 8 microphone at my disposal for this, so I just kind of went with what I had, and I think it'll work out fine. We'll kind of, throughout the process, we'll look at that, and we'll make sure that things sound good in stereo, because that's obviously the goal, but we also want to keep in mind what it's going to sound like for a mono mix. So there you go. When you're doing the scratch tracks, I find it really helpful to have some kind of smaller subdivision in the metronome. Quarter notes sometimes are just way too slow, so I like to have a little bit of a smaller subdivision. And you can do that with drums, you can do that with shaker, you can do that with woodblock, whatever. For me, it was pretty easy just to fire up an instance of Contact and throw some drums in there, and bada boom, just lay down a quick 4-measure groove and loop that, and that worked out fine. And we also checked out recording, the acoustic guitars as well, with a real simple setup, just a boom mic, shock mount, large diaphragm condenser microphone. And the results are really nice, super clean. We got some great tones, different guitars, Taylor, Blue Ridge, Martin, some fine instruments there. And we got some good stuff to work with. At this point, there's a little bit of EQ and compression applied to some of them to basically just babysit them. If we need those flavors as we're tracking other stuff, we don't have drastic volume jumps, keeps everything kind of in check. We're not adding EQ to really finalize the tone or anything at this point. And so that's why you see some of these tracks just have some real basic compression on there. Just some low cuts, little tiny scoop there. Nothing really drastic. Because we covered acoustic guitar, I do want to mention that it's really important to just double check what's going on in the headphones for the monitor of the guy who's tracking the guitars. Acoustic guitar, especially if you're doing a finger pick kind of thing, not tremendously loud, right? So you don't have a ton of signal, which means that if you're not using the right kind of headphones, or the headphone level is too loud, you will pick up whatever's going on in the headphones, in the microphone that you're using to track your guitars. And this happened to us. I had the click and the drums up so he could hear it pretty good. And then we checked after a couple of bars, and we could indeed hear a very faint click in there. It was actually the metronome on this guy here is a shaker, and I could very faintly hear it. I actually couldn't hear it in my headphones, but Jeff said that in his headphones, he could hear it. So we swapped around some headphones. I gave him some different headphones that isolate the sound a little bit better. And we did some volume management to get it to where he could hear the click, he could hear the shaker, he could hear the drums, but it wasn't bleeding at all. Basically, we just rolled without him playing. And if you can't hear it without anything playing and the microphone on, in the microphone you're using to track with, then it's not going to make any difference as long as he can hear everything okay. You're going to need a perfectly clean recording. And so that's what we had to do. And as we started doing some vocal tracks, we did the same thing, but we'll talk about that more in an upcoming video. So there you go. This is the first installment in a multi-part series. In the next video, we're going to look at how we handled tracking the drums And then we're going to look at how we recorded electric guitars on this. And then after that, we will be looking at kind of filling out the rest of these parts using lots of virtual instruments, synths, a lot of native instrument stuff because that's what I have, but also really great third-party stuff to really fill out these tracks and make them sound nice. So make sure you stay updated in this series as we continue building out these tracks and working on other tracks, working on the guitars, the bass, the drums, and the other instrumentation. Really building out these pieces into something that's very beautiful and very nice sounding. So make sure you stay updated in this series. Thanks so much for checking out this video. Again, my name is Dave Bodie for Tuts Plus, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.